So here's the background of the book of Nehemiah that you need to know to be able to appreciate the story. Back around 600 BC, the armies of Babylon, which were the mightiest empire of the time, came and destroyed Jerusalem. And they took the people, God's people, into exile. You say, why in the world would God allow that to happen? If you know your Old Testament, you know the reason. It's because God's people had turned their backs on the Lord. And for a long, long time, they'd been thumbing their nose at Him. And though God sent prophets to warn them, and miracles to humble them, and His Word to teach them, God gave them grace upon grace to repent and turn around. They refused Him. And so God finally reached the place where He said, okay, I'm going to give you what you always wanted, a life without me, a life without my favor and protection. And this Old Testament template is still very much active today. This book, Nehemiah, remains very much a warning to America today of what should happen if we continue to turn our backs on the Lord. It can turn and get ugly in a hurry. This exile lasted, anybody know how long the exile lasted? 70 years, so a long time. And it's interesting, this exile was foretold by Jeremiah the prophet. I just finished reading Jeremiah over the last couple months. Very, very challenging book to read, but every one of God's people needs to read this book. And Nehemiah said, look, this is going to happen, and it's going to last for 70 years. And at the end of that 70 years, God miraculously opened the door for the Jews to go back. When the armies of Persia came and defeated the Babylonians, and the king of Persia, named Cyrus, gave God's people the green light to go back. And so they returned in waves back to Jerusalem. The first thing they did is they rebuilt the temple. They did that in 516 BC. And then they began the work of rebuilding the city. But at some point along the way, they lost all that momentum, and they got stuck, and the rebuilding came to a halt. Now, we don't know why. We can guess. Change is hard. Yes, nod your head if you agree with that. Even good change, is it hard? We make resolutions to change things about our lives. Some of us have already, getting ready to join the health club. That's what they all do in January, huh? And then invariably what happens? All that air goes out of our sails. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was the opposition they faced. The Jews have always had fierce enemies. It was the same in Nehemiah's time. It may have been laziness, or it may have been the sheer amount of rebuilding that had to take place. It wasn't just the temple that needed to be rebuilt. Back then, arguably the most important thing that a city needed was to have a wall built around it. They didn't have airplanes back then, so to defend the city, a wall was your way of announcing to the world that here was a people that you don't want to mess around with. Fast forward to the start of Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah begins 446 BC. Don't let your eyes glaze over with the dates, but it's now 90 years after the exiles first went back. And the first thing we learn in this story is that those walls, so important for the dignity and beauty and security of a people, those walls are still in ruins.